Hello students, welcome to this lecture on judicial cases related to the Directive Principles of a State Policy, that is DPSPs. The Directive Principles of a State Policy in Part 4, stretching from Articles 36 to 51 of the Constitution, act as guiding values that direct the state to establish a welfare and just society. Though these principles are non-justiciable under Article 37, they are declared fundamental in the governance of the country. Over the decades, Indian courts have played a decisive role in interpreting DPSPs in conjunction with fundamental rights contained in Part 3, thereby creating a harmony between enforceable rights and moral duties. Through landmark cases, the judiciary has transformed many principles into substantive rights, giving practical shape to the constitutional commitment to social, economic, and political justice. The courts have read into Article 21 that deals with right to life and personal liberty several elements derived from DPSPs, such as livelihood, education, and environment. As a result, the jurisprudence on DPSPs has expanded far beyond its original non-enforceable character. This lecture traces the key judgments that have defined this evolution from Champakam Dorai Rajan 1951 to Ashok Kumar Thakur 2008, showing how the Supreme Court has ensured that India's welfare objectives remain constitutionally grounded. The earliest judicial interpretation of the relationship between fundamental rights and DPSPs came through the Champakam Dorai Rajan case. The Madras government had introduced a communal government order reserving seats in medical and engineering colleges for various castes. Champakam Dorai Rajan, a Brahmin applicant, was denied admission despite better merit and challenged the order under Article 15, Section 1. The right to equality, the Supreme Court held that the fundamental rights are supreme and cannot be overridden by DPSPs. Consequently, the communal government order was struck down as unconstitutional. This decision exposed the tension between individual rights and social justice goals, envisaged in Article 46, which calls for promoting educational and economic interests of weaker sections. In response, Parliament enacted the first constitutional amendment, 1951, introducing Article 15(4), enabling the state to make special provisions for socially and educationally backward classes. Thus, even though DPSPs could not initially override fundamental rights, the legislature ensured their objectives through constitutional amendment, marking the beginning of reconciliation between Part 3 and 4. The Keshwanand Bharti case was a turning point in constitutional history. Swami Keshwanand Bharti, head of a Kerala monastery, challenged the state's land reform laws enacted under DPSPs promoting economic equality. He argued that such laws violated his fundamental rights to property and religion. The Supreme Court's 13-judge bench evolved the basic structure doctrine, holding that while Parliament has wide powers to amend the Constitution, including fundamental rights, it cannot alter its basic structure. The court observed that DPSPs and fundamental rights must coexist harmoniously. Land reforms and redistribution aimed at social justice are valid as long as they do not destroy the essential features of the Constitution, such as rule of law and judicial review. The judgment reinforced economic directives under Articles 38 and 39, yet preserved liberty and equality. Hence, the ruling gave constitutional legitimacy to welfare measures while protecting individual rights, defining the delicate balance that remains central to Indian Constitution. The Minerva Mill case or judgment further clarified the relationship between fundamental rights and DPSPs. The 42nd Amendment of 1976 had expanded Article 31C, granting absolute primacy to laws implementing certain DPSPs, even if they violated fundamental rights under Article 14 and 19. Minerva Mills, a private textile company, challenged this amendment as unconstitutional. The Supreme Court held that giving unlimited superiority to DPSPs would destroy the basic structure of the Constitution, which requires balance between individual freedoms and social goals. The court struck down clauses that curbed judicial review and guaranteed that Parliament's power to amend remains limited. The judgment declared that harmony, not supremacy, between parts 3 and 4 forms part of the basic structure. Consequently, welfare objectives must advance within constitutional limits. Minerva Mill reaffirmed that social justice legislation should complement, not compromise, personal liberty and equality, ensuring that both fundamental rights and DPSPs operate in equilibrium. The petitioner, an educational institution owner, questioned free regulations imposed by the state, leading the court to examine whether education could be claimed as a fundamental right. Referring to Article 45, a DPSP mandating free and compulsory education up to 14 years, and Article 14, the Supreme Court held that the right to education flows directly from Article 21, as education is essential for the full development of personality. This judgment effectively converted a directive principle into an enforceable fundamental right. It inspired the 86th Amendment 2002, inserting Article 21A, guaranteeing free and compulsory education for children aged 6 to 14 years. The case demonstrated the judiciary's proactive approach in realizing socio-economic rights through constitutional interpretation. It also reaffirmed the state's duty to ensure equitable access to education as part of its DPSP commitments under Articles 45 and 46. The Olga Tellis case extended the scope of Article 21 by integrating socio-economic principles from DPSPs. When the Bombay Municipal Corporation sought to evict pavement dwellers as encroachers, activists argued that eviction without alternative shelter violated their right to life and livelihood. The Supreme Court agreed, ruling that livelihood is inseparable from life itself. The court held that before displacing the poor, the state must consider its obligations under Articles 38 and 41 to promote welfare and assist citizens in need. This decision humanized constitutional interpretations by ensuring that administrative actions respect social justice directives. It compelled authorities to adopt rehabilitation measures, influencing later urban housing and slum redevelopment policies. Olga Tellis thus stands as a landmark in linking the socio-economic vision of DPSPs with the enforceable protection of life and dignity under Article 21. Environmental governance in India owes much to M.C. Mehta. Following the oil gas leak incident in Delhi, the Supreme Court addressed industrial pollution and public health hazards. The court ruled that the right to life under Article 21 includes the right to a healthy environment. It directed the government to apply Article 48A of the Constitution, a DPSP inserted by the 42nd Amendment, which mandates the state to protect and improve the environment and safeguard forests and wildlife. The court introduced the principles of absolute liability and polluter pays, creating a strong foundation for environmental jurisprudence. The decision led to strict enforcement of the Environment Protection Act 1986 and inspired ongoing judicial monitoring of pollution control. MC Mehta transformed a directive into a constitutional duty, reinforcing the concept of sustainable development as an extension of the right to life and dignity. The Dalmia Cement case expanded the interpretation of labor welfare provisions. It addressed workers' participation in industrial management, a principle drawn from Article 43A added by the 42nd Amendment. The court upheld the validity of state policies encouraging employee involvement in decision making and emphasized that industrial democracy is part of India's constitutional ethos. The judgment reinforced that DPSPs are not ornamental but practical directives guiding labor relations and industrial policy. It recognized that participatory management ensures harmony between capital and labor, aligning with socialist ideals under Articles 38 and 39. The ruling encouraged the government to design cooperative frameworks and consultative mechanisms for industrial peace. Dalmia Cement thus strengthened the constitutional vision of equitable economic participation and reflected DPSP's relevance in modern labor governance. This case tested the constitutional validity of 27% reservation for other backward classes in higher education institutions introduced by the 93rd Amendment 2005. In Ashok Kumar Thakur versus Union of India 2008, petitioners argued that such reservations violated equality principles under Articles 14 and 19. The Supreme Court upheld the amendment, confirming that reservation is a legitimate instrument to achieve social justice. The judgment relied on Article 46, which directs the state to promote the educational and economic interest of weaker sections. It recognized affirmative action as an integral component of equality, not an exception to it. The court reaffirmed the 50% ceiling set in Indira Sohani while upholding data-based implementation. Ashok Kumar Thakur reaffirmed the continuing vitality of DPSPs in shaping modern affirmative action policies and reaffirmed the constitutional balance between merit and equality. Now we are dealing with People's Union for Civil Liberties versus Union of India 2001 Right to Food case. During the 2001 drought, despite overflowing food stocks, hunger and starvation deaths were reported. PUCL filed a writ petition arguing that the state's inaction violated the right to life under Article 21. Though we have stocks of food grains, the Supreme Court recognized the right to food as an integral part of this right, grounded in DPSPs such as Articles 39 B, distribution of resources, and 47, nutrition and public health. The court directed governments to implement and monitor public distribution and nutrition schemes. This litigation evolved into a continuing mandamus, leading to creation of midday meal programs and eventually the National Food Security Act 2013. PUCL demonstrated how judicial intervention can transform directive goals into enforceable entitlements, reinforcing the constitutional duty to secure basic human needs as part of welfare governance. The Indira Sohani versus Union of India 1992, dealing with Mandal Commission cases. Indira Sohani case, popularly called the Mandal Commission case, examined reservation for OBCs in public employment under Articles 15, Clause 4 and 16, Clause 4. The petitioners contended that such quotas violated equality under Article 14. The Supreme Court upheld the 27% OBC reservation but imposed a 50% cap to preserve balance. It introduced the creamy layer principle, excluding the economically advanced among backward classes. The judgment explicitly cited Article 46, affirming the state's obligation to promote weaker sections. The court clarified that affirmative action does not erode equality. It fulfills it. Indira Sohani institutionalized social justice within constitutional limits, providing a permanent framework for reservation policy and setting enduring standards for fairness and proportionality. In DPSPs and judicial evolution, over time, the Supreme Court has turned DPSPs from moral principles into living constitutional instruments. The court has expanded the scope of Article 21 to include education, livelihood, environment, health, and shelter, each originally embedded in Part 4. This process, known as harmonious construction, ensures that parts 3 and 4 complement each other. Judicial activism in the 1980s and 90s brought socio-economic rights to the forefront of constitutional law. Through public interest litigation, citizens invoked DPSPs to demand government accountability. The judiciary, while respecting parliamentary supremacy, ensured that the spirit of social welfare remained alive. Thus, DPSPs have become the bridge connecting constitutional ideals with day to day governance and public welfare, ensuring that justice remains the paramount objective of state policy. Judicial DPSPs and legislative impact. Judicial pronouncements have inspired extensive legislative action implementing DPSPs. Parliament enacted laws such as the Equal Remuneration Act of 1976, Legal Services Authorities Act 1987, Environment Protection Act 1986, and the Right to Education Act 2009, each reflecting directives from Part 4. These statutes operationalize rights to equality, environment, education, and welfare. Legislatures regularly cite Articles 38 to 48A while framing policies for health, nutrition, labor, and housing. Budget allocations for social sectors reflect DPSP priorities. The process demonstrates an organic link between judicial interpretation and legislative reform. Courts articulate principles, legislatures translate them into law. Consequently, DPSPs have evolved from policy suggestions into measurable governmental responsibilities, realizing the Constitution's vision of a welfare oriented and inclusive society. DPSPs and fundamental rights reconciliation. The initial conflict between fundamental rights and directive principles has gradually been replaced by doctrinal harmony. The basic structure doctrine ensures that neither part subordinates the other. Courts interpret fundamental rights in light of DPSPs to achieve substantive equality. Article 21 has become the meeting point of civil political rights and socio-economic directives. Fundamental rights supply enforceability, while DPSPs provide policy direction and moral justification. This balanced approach prevents the extremes of unchecked liberty or absolute socialism. It also ensures that judicial review upholds both individual freedoms and collective welfare. In essence, the reconciliation of parts 3 and 4 reflects the living spirit of the Constitution, that is, dynamic, evolving, and dedicated to justice in all forms. Social and economic justice through DPSPs. DPSPs remain the constitutional backbone for achieving social and economic justice. Articles 38 to 47 urge the state to minimize inequalities, secure livelihoods, provide health care, and protect workers. Judicial decisions supported by welfare schemes like Manreka, midday meals, and public health initiatives embody these mandates. By integrating DPSP into governance, India advances towards the preamble's promise of justice and dignity. The combination of judicial oversight and legislative action ensures that socio-economic rights evolve with changing needs. Thus, DPSPs operate as a continuous directive for inclusive growth, equality of opportunity, and sustainable development, reaffirming the idea that democracy must deliver material as well as political well-being. Significance of judicial interpretation. Judicial interpretation has been instrumental in converting the moral philosophy of DPSPs into enforceable constitutional reality without being justiciable. The Supreme Court, through creative reasoning, infused these principles with operational content. Environmental rights, food security, education, and legal aid now function as practical entitlements. This evolution reflects the adaptability of the Constitution and the proactive role of the judiciary as its guardian. Courts ensure that governmental policies align with the preamble's ideals and DPSP's objectives. By transforming public interest litigation into a tool for social engineering, the judiciary has democratized access to justice. Consequently, DPSPs no longer remain theoretical. They are living norms influencing every sphere of governance and human rights protection in India. The directive principles of state policy embody the Constitution's commitment to a just and humane order. Judicial interpretation over the decades has elevated these principles from non enforceable ideals to the guiding spirit of Indian governance. Through landmark decisions from Champakam Durai Rajan to Ashok Kumar Thakur, the Supreme Court has harmonized fundamental rights with socio-economic directives. Courts, legislature, and executive together have translated moral obligations into tangible rights and welfare programs. Although DPSPs remain formally non-justiciable, their influence permeates every domain of public policy. They continue to guide India towards its constitutional destiny, a welfare state guaranteeing liberty, equality, and justice for all citizens, fulfilling the vision articulated in the preamble of the Constitution. Thank you.